Hey guys, so with 8.1 came many Elemental Shaman changes. I have made a couple videos going over how good I think Ellie's going to be and the changes themselves, but in this video, it's going to be more of a guide. That's going to be specifically going to be a guide on Elemental Shaman. I have kind of tried to record this a couple times and it always ended up being way too long. So I kind of decided I was going to do 3 separate videos, potentially a different number than 3, but right now I'm planning on doing 3. 1 for talents, 1 for rotation, and 1 for more of a gearing thing. So I'll probably do 3 separate videos and upload 1 very long video of all of it for those that want to binge watch. But in this section or video is going to be talents. So stay tuned if you want to see about 8.1 talents. And of course, as you may notice, this video is going to be based on stormwithandlava.com, and if something changes, for example, if a certain talent is buffed, if Elemental Blast damage gets doubled or something, and you want to know, should I use that now? Make sure to check the website because I can't go back and retroactively change the guide on YouTube. So the website will be the best place to make sure nothing changed. But without further ado, let's hop into the talents. So a TLDR version, we got a questing and solo content thing that I'm not really going to go into much. But I will say I personally would much rather use Ice Fury than Surge of Power, but that's just me. Otherwise, kind of use whatever you want here. For Mythic Plus, you got Earth and Rage. Very good talent there. Totem Mastery, Spirit Wolf, or Static Charge, depending on the situation. Storm Elemental or Liquid Magma Totem, depending on situation. Nature's Guardian or Ancestral Guidance, depending on situation. And Purple Elementalist or Ice Fury, depending on situation. So I will go into a lot more detail about situations here. Then Stormkeeper, of course, is the last one. But I will go into a lot more detail on the situations here in a little bit. But if you just want a general all-purpose good Mythic Plus build, go with all the left side things here. And you can ignore the right side as they are the more situational ones of the talent row. For Raid's single target gameplay, Earth and Rage is the best still, Totem Mastery is the best, Spirit Wolf, Storm Elemental, Nature's Guardian, Primal Elementalist, and Stormkeeper. So now that that is out of the way, let's talk a lot more in depth about each individual talent and which situation you might use it in. The first row we got here is level 15 row. Earth and Rage is plain and simple. It's too good. It is just way too powerful in this row. There is no reason to ever use anything else. It is perfectly fine with movement. It does not require any min-maxing. It is also beneficial in AoE because it still does its thing. It's all passive. And it pretty much doubles the damage of Echo and Elemental Blast. There's no reason ever to use anything else. Hopefully that will change in the future. If that does change, Echo of the Elements is pretty nice for a more movement-heavy fight because while the other charge is cooling down, the other one is available to cast. You have 2 charges cooling down. It's just overall you have more things that are happening while you're moving and then more things you can do when you get to plant and stop. Elemental Blast, for example, though it does cool down, you might think same logic, but there's only 1 charge. So if you're moving when that comes up, you are just simply losing damage. Whereas Lava Burst, 1 comes up, the other one's still coming up, you have time to use that. Elemental Blast is also just really undertuned. Deck of the Elements, they have to add some Lava Burst damage or something to it to make it catch up to Earth and Rage. Earth and Rage is just so good. Now, actually before we move on from that, one thing to note is that if Echo of the Elements ever is okay, it synergizes really well with Master of the Elements, so if that is ever a thing, we could see some Master of the Elements, Echo of the Elements, and Ice Fury type of build, and then Elemental Blast synergizes really well with Natural Harmony. So if we ever see that get buffed, that could be really nice synergy there as well. And Natural Harmony does make Elemental Blast a little better. So if you have like 3 Natural Harmonies or something, maybe sim it just to make sure Elemental Blast isn't actually good. Level 30 row, we got Aftershock, Call of Thunder, and Totem Mastery. This is one of my favorite rows for the diversity and the amount of choice you have here. So on pure single target, Totem Mastery is simply the best. It is so versatile. It is good on movement because you're generating Maelstrom, you're doing Flame Shock damage. You have more haste and more overload chance for when you stop moving. You have overload chance on Chain Lightning, you got haste for AoE. It just is an all-purpose talent that is really good, especially on the single target bosses. Aftershock starts to pull ahead on 5 or more targets. Kind of competes on 2+. And one thing Aftershock is actually really good for is in a dungeon, if you don't need a kite that much, but there's a lot of casters, you can use Aftershock and get a whole bunch of earthquakes down and interrupt a lot of those casts. Super valuable. So in dungeons, Aftershock is a pretty common pick. More AoE damage, more interrupts from earthquakes, so do keep that in mind. Then Call of the Thunder is kind of just overall not very good right now. It's just undertuned. This guide's going to be mostly about PvP, or rather PvE, so I won't really talk about the PvP benefits of this, but that is potential there, I guess. Level 45 talent, definitely a more personal choice thing here. My personal choice is almost always Spirit Wolf. You get up to a 20% damage reduction, which is really nice for things like Upheaval and Toldagor. You know what's coming, you go Ghost Wolf, chill for a sec, can help you survive quite a bit there. And also, when you're just running from point A to point B, it gives you that little speed boost. So there's two nice little things about Spirit Wolf here that are entirely passive. You just go Ghost Wolf. Earth Shield does take a GCD, and the healing itself is kind of not very good. So I don't really like this talent at all. I never really use this. Wouldn't really recommend that you use this. Maybe some very specific fight, like a very attrition-based fight, you might want to use this. If DPS doesn't really matter, get some more healing out. But in general, a Spirit Wolf is definitely more valuable. Static Charge might have some very specific niche use. Some like Mythic Plus pull back to back. Want that cooldown up 20 seconds sooner so you can stun again if you don't have any other stuns in the group, or I don't know, something like that. But generally, this talent's kind of not very good. Level 60 row, another more versatile row here. We got Master of the Elements, like I said, can be used with Ice Fury. Definitely beneficial for movement because of the Ice Fury. So, potential for that there, not good at AoE, so I wouldn't really use this in Mythic Plus at all. Because on 4 or more targets, you never use Lava Burst, so no reason to ever use Master of the Elements there. Never going to buff it. 3 targets, there's a lot of potential for it because of Earthquake buffing, but it's competing with 2 AoE talents, so it just isn't good for AoE. I wouldn't suggest it for AoE. But for high movement fights, do consider this with Ice Fury. Storm Elemental is a really good talent because it is very good for single target if you can plant for those 30 seconds and just cast. Specifically, you can cast Lightning Bolt like almost the whole time. It's also, with Primal Elementalist, an excellent AoE talent with an excellent AoE cooldown burst. Not only are you getting the AoE cooldown burst, you're also getting the reduced Chain Lightning cast time, which can get you a ton of Earthquakes out. So a lot of potential for Storm Ele in pretty much every possible situation. The only thing that hurts Storm Ele a lot is like high movement single target, which you can use Master of the Elements with, or you can use Liquid Magma Totem with. Liquid Magma Totem is nice for more frequent AoE, slightly less bursty, but more consistent. You can use it a lot more often. Pretty nice for smaller amounts of targets. So, in a summary, Storm Ele is the default choice. Very strong, very versatile. There's a lot of potential for Master of the Elements with Ice Fury on AoE. And Liquid Magma Totem is kind of nice for like small target cleave, or potentially AoE in which you have to move a lot. Because you can just put it down and you can run around and do whatever, and it will continue benefiting entirely as long as the mob stays still. Whereas Storm Elemental, it does have its AoE on its own, but if you're not casting, you're losing a decent part of the benefit from it. So a pretty nicely balanced talent row here. There's potential for all of them to be used, but the default choice is Storm Ele. Next talent row is another more utility, more choice-driven one. Nature's Guardian, really nice for survival. You don't have to really think about it. It kind of does its thing. Ancestral Guidance, surprisingly underrated, but very good AoE heal if you're doing AoE damage. So let's say you're doing a very large pull in Mythic Plus, a Toldazar or something, it's Venom casters, there's those big reanimated guys that are constantly AoEing the group. You pop Stormkeeper, you pop Storm Ele, you pop Ancestral Guidance, and you are healing the group for 20k HPS and keeping everybody alive. Very, very nice talent to have access to. But in general, Nature's Guardian is going to be better because it's just kind of a passive thing you get to have. Don't have to think about using it. And most of the time you don't need Ancestral Guidance, but when you do need it, it's so nice to have. So do consider using that for higher keys if you need it. And then Windrush Totem is kind of just there. Most people forget it exists, but there is some situations in which you could use this pretty effectively. Some raid bosses where you need a whole group to run somewhere. Basically, if you don't have a Feral or Guardian Druid, and there's a fight which Stampeding Roar is needed, you can say, hey, I have the Ghetto version, let's use that, and then or Raid will thank you. So keep that in mind as well. Don't forget it exists, because there is situations where you can use Windrush Totem. This talent row is actually my favorite talent row, next to the Aftershock side. So actually, we have quite a few talent rows that are pretty versatile. But on this one, first up, Surge of Power, one of the new talents. This thing is very complicated to use properly, but if used properly in the right situation, it is really, really powerful. I believe there's a blog post coming out soon about the details on this, but long story short, it can potentially allow you to get an additional use of your elemental cooldown by using the Lava Burst benefit from it, which reduces the cooldown of your elemental by 6 seconds. So if there's a fight that's 7 minutes and 30 seconds long, you get one on pull, you get one at 2 minutes 30 second mark, you get one at the 5 minute mark, and then right as it comes off cooldown, the boss would die. So if there's a fight that you know is going to be that long, or at least sometime within like 10 or 20 seconds of that long, you could spec Surge of Power and Storm Melee, and use some Lava Bursts that are buffed and get an additional use of your Elemental, and get quite a bit of benefit out of that. Outside of those ones where you're reducing the cooldown, if you don't need it, the cooldown reduced anymore, my voice is giving out, but you do not need the cooldown reduced any further, you could just start using Lightning Bolts, which is also a very good DPS option, and synergizes quite well with the Stormkeeper. This talent, a very high skill cap talent, very high potential talent, a very high risk talent, so something to keep in mind if you're a newer player is I'd probably avoid this one. And it also has absolutely no benefit on AoE, so I don't see this being used in Mythic Plus at all. Primal Elementalist is kind of the default choice because not a whole lot of effort goes into using it properly. Just a nice passive bonus you get, and it's also very versatile. You get single target damage, very good, AoE damage, very good. Just a cooldown thing, so it's also a nice little burst window. It's overall a very nice talent to have. As long as you use Meteor on AoE, either Storm on AoE, you can also do a ton of AoE with it, so nice talent, just overall versatile, easy to use talent. That's why it is the suggested talent. Ice Fury, purely single target, but the reason I said you could potentially use this in Mythic Plus is primarily going to be explosive affix weeks, because explosive orbs will likely be one-shot by the Frost Shocks, or at the very worst, two-shot. So early on in the poll, which is usually when things get out of control, people aren't really ramped up yet, pop your Ice Fury, start Frost Shocking, and you can be saving the life of everyone while they all ramp. And then you can start AoEing with your Stormkeeper and stuff. So this could have a lot of potential. Also, let's say you're doing like King's Rest or something that's tyrannical, you want more boss damage, bosses have a lot of movement on them. Ice Fury is quite good for single target with high movement, especially with Mastery of the Elements, so there's also a lot of potential for raids with that. So Ice Fury is actually competitive now. You can use this when you need more movement, so do keep that in mind. I really like that Ice Fury is useful now. Gives us a whole other damage profile. Also good for like 30-second burst windows, or windows adds a spawn every 30 seconds that need to be bursted down, things like that. So just to summarize this row, Primal Elementalist is the default choice. Surge of Power is really, really good on single target if you can use it properly. Then Ice Fury offers you a more mobile build. With Master of the Elements in particular, it can be quite good. Now, 100 talents is pretty easy. Elemental Power, pretty undertuned. We don't really use Mastery. Ascendance, really undertuned. Pretty bad, like really bad. And then Stormkeeper is really good. It is not only single target, but is also excellent AoE, so Stormkeeper is just the go-to here. You never use anything else. I would not use Ascendance or Unlimited Power in pretty much any situation. So Stormkeeper, definitely the go-to here. So that is it for the talents section of the guide. If you are watching the Mega Guide or whatever, stay tuned and you will get the rest of the guide, the priority list coming up next. So there's going to be a lot to look at on this page, so don't worry too much if you get a little confused. I will be showing some in-game examples and trying to go through a little bit to make things feel a little more simple at the end. Let's go through the raw data here of like what is actually the best in order of like what you should be casting, otherwise known as a priority list. So you can kind of select which build you want, and things will change. But we're going to be starting with the normal single target build that we talked about in the talents, the normal one that you'd actually be running in majority of fights. So top of the list is refreshing totem mastery if you were out of range of it or it is no longer active, as if it expires. Then of course you want to be using your cooldowns as often as possible unless you're saving it specifically for a certain part of the fight. Keep Flame Shock up at 100% of the time, pretty much straight from the opener. You never want this to fall off. Refresh it if it's not active, refresh it if it's at 7 seconds or lower, because that is the pandemic range. You will not lose any duration if you refresh it at 7 seconds or lower. And if you are in Storm Elemental, do not refresh it if you have over 14 stacks of Wind Gust. Generally, before going into Storm Elemental, you want to refresh Flame Shock immediately before going into Storm Elemental, so you can then just spam your Lightning Bolts and Earth Shocks without needing to worry about that extra global. But we'll get a little more into that in a bit. Number 4 is Stormkeeper. You want to ideally game this with Surge of Power and stuff, but we'll look at that a little more when we get to the Surge of Power part. But just keep Stormkeeper on cooldown as much as you can, unless you're saving it for a large AoE pull, or a large AoE part of the fight. If there are 2 or more targets, you want to be using Earthquake as your spender instead of Earth Shock. Now, if Lightning Bolt, if Stormkeeper is active, below the spender. Now, there are going to be some extra things that we'll look at a little bit, but there's nothing to actually min-max with Stormkeeper on this current talent setup. Now, Earth Shock, personally, I would put Earth Shock here being at 92 or more Maelstrom. And the lower you get, we'll add another Earth Shock line, but just for simplicity's sake, I don't think they wanted a whole bunch of Earth Shock lines, because technically there could be like 10, I think, if you really wanted to put all these different little conditionals and stuff. But here we got Earth Shock at high Maelstrom if you need to worry about overcapping Earth Shock on one target, Earthquake on 2 or more. Lightning Bolt if Storm Elemental is active, so Lightning Bolt over Lava Burst, keep that in mind. Even if you have a Lava Surge proc, Lightning Bolt is still superior. Lava Burst with Surge of Power if you get another use of Storm Elemental. I'm actually not sure why this one's on the non-Surge of Power section, but that is something that I kind of want to talk about as well. The main thing with Surge of Power rotation is knowing when to use Lava Burst and knowing when to use Lightning Bolt, and I might actually make a video entirely based on that in itself once I learn how to actually maximize this. And by learn how, I mean once I properly do it in a raid, I'm going to try for sure next week. This week I didn't use it because I wanted to get the kill times down. But moving on from that, below this is just Lava Burst in general. Of course, below Lightning Bolt and Storm Elemental is active, but above Lightning Bolt without Storm Elemental. Below that is, if you have nothing else to do, and your Totem Mastery is getting low, just refresh it, just to make sure you don't end up overlapping something else with having the Totem Mastery run out and end up losing like a Lava Burst use or something. Lightning Bolt as a filler, and then if you were moving, you just put Frost Shock as your filler. Of course, if you're moving, you can refresh Flame Shock or Earth Shock instead, but you can't do any of those. Frost Shock is where that comes in. So now let's compare the changes of this build to some other popular builds you might play. So here, you might play Surge of Power. The main thing that you'd want to min-max with Surge of Power would be buffing both the Lightning Bolts from your Stormkeeper. Then of course, if you can get an extra Elemental use out, you would want to use Lava Burst on your Surge of Power to get that out. The way you actually do buff your Stormkeeper with Surge of Power is you gotta get to 96 or higher Maelstrom, an Earth Shock Stormkeeper in any order, Lightning Bolt to consume the first buff. You have to have a Lava Burst ready to generate some Maelstrom, unless you get really lucky with the overloads on the first Lightning Bolt, but you shouldn't really try to rely on that, so go try to hold a Lava Burst if you can. Lava Burst will give you enough Maelstrom to Earth Shock again, and then you can Lightning Bolt on the second charge. So you can get a ton of damage if you get extra overloads here, both empowered by Stormkeeper, so that's definitely something you want to try to do outside of the very first Stormkeeper of the fight. The very first one you just want to use before the pull. But that is something throughout the fight you should be trying to do. Now, Master of the Elements and Ice Fury is another build you can look at here. Primary changes here is, since you can't have Master of the Elements and Surge of Power at the same time. Generally, you won't. So, if you don't have Surge of Power, I guess if you have them both, you would prioritize Surge of Power on your Stormkeeper charges, but otherwise, you do want to try to buff your Stormkeeper charges with Master of the Elements, if at all possible. And I'll be showing some in-game examples of this in a little bit too. But so that is the most powerful thing you can buff with most, so make sure to try to do that. Just below Earth Shock, at high Maelstrom is Frost Shock with the Ice Fury buff and Master of the Elements active. Below that, Lava Burst, and then just Frost Shock with Ice Fury buff. Also a nice Maelstrom generator. What I personally did to make sure I could buff the Stormkeeper, on pull at least, is I would just fill with the Frost Shocks until I got the another Lava Burst, and I'd buff that. But again, I'll show that a little more in depth in a little bit. But just giving an example of when the rotation might change a little to work around what you have in front of you. But this is general rotation. This Frost Shock with Ice Fury, cast Ice Fury on cooldown, brush Totem Mastery as you normally would, and then everything else is normal. Now, I don't think there's anything else that really changes. The Abstract doesn't really change anything. All the Thunder doesn't really change anything. Elemental Blast is just a high priority spell. If you're not in Storm Elemental, if you're in Storm Elemental, you don't actually want to use it. But if you can cast a Master of the Elements with Earth Shock, that's the only time you would not want to cast Elemental Blast, ahead of pretty much everything else. Because Elemental Blast is worse than an Earth Shock, so you don't want to buff that with the Master of the Elements, so you'd rather spend that on the Earth Shock first. But otherwise, Master of the Elements is a pretty high priority spell there. Ascendance, normal stuff. If you don't want to stack this with Storm Elemental at all anymore, Storm Elemental is too powerful with the Lightning Bolt. You want to spread them if at all possible. And then you also want to dump your Lava Burst charges before popping Ascendance. And you don't want Ice Fury up because you don't want to stack those. Unless you know there's movement coming or something, I guess you could try to do something with that, but I probably would avoid doing that. And I think that sums it up, except for Liquid Magma Totem, which is just another high priority cooldown spell. Echo the Elements doesn't really change anything. But so that is the basic rotation on paper. And we're going to go into some of the more specifics right now. So here we have an actual list of best to worst things to buff with Master of the Elements, which is not as complicated to think of as you might think. Basically just whatever does the most actual damage. The Earthquake on 2 or more targets is the actual best thing to buff. Then it's an Empowered Lightning Bolt from Stormkeeper. Then it is an Earth Shock. Then it's a Frost Shock from Ice Fury, Lightning Bolt, Ice Fury. So unfortunately, Ice Fury itself is actually weaker than a Lightning Bolt. And then just an unbuffed Frost Shock. Now I'm curious, if I turn this over to Elemental Blast, will that add this? It does not, so I could just look at the actual damage here and just tell you right now. 63%, that would go below Lightning Bolt and above Ice Fury if you have Elemental Blast. So don't really buff Elemental Blast very much. That's a very weak damage spell. It's all about the buffs you get. Now, with Storm Elemental and Elemental Blast, if for some reason you have 3 natural harmonies, like in a Mythic Plus or something, and you're running Elemental Blast and Storm Elemental, and you have them both up at the same time, you do want to keep using Elemental Blast until 14 stacks of Wind Gust, so keep that in mind. That is one exception to that rule. And here we already talked about this. Surge of Power on 2 targets, as long as both targets don't have Flame Shock, or they are in the Pandemic range, and also in Spread range. Use Earth Shock once to spread the Flame Shock before going into Earthquake. So keep that in mind. And just in case you did miss the part up here where it says 1 or 2 targets, the Lightning Bolt as a filler is actually on 2 targets now as well, so don't be using Chain Lightning on 2 targets anymore. For 3 or more targets, Totem Mastery, keep that up as much as you can. Use your Elementals, maintain that Flame Shocks on up to 3 targets. Earthquake, whenever available, try to game it with Master of the Elements if you're fighting 3 targets. With your Lava Surge procs, you can try to get the Earthquake down. Lava Burst to consume Lava Surge procs on 3 targets. Never hard cast a Lava Burst, only the procs. And don't even use the procs if Storm Elemental is active. Instead, you just want to use the Chain Lightning and Earthquake. Elemental Blast up to 3 targets, not on 4 or more. And then just Chain Lightning as a filler. Now, special mention to Flame Shock here, because it actually is technically worth it at 4 targets if you can maintain them all. But there are very few situations in the game where there are 4 targets that will all live long enough to survive a full cycle of Flame Shock application, so we decided to leave 3 as the suggestion. But if you are ever in a situation where it's like a raid boss with 4 targets that are all going to last the entire duration, do go ahead and Flame Shock them all. It is a technical increase. And I'm going to show you my personal favorite opener. Openers are kind of like a little nitpicky thing that don't really increase damage or decrease damage all that much. I don't really like the one on Storm and Lava, if I'm being completely honest, but I also know that it doesn't really make a difference. But I'm going to show you what I personally like to do because it feels better. Not necessarily more or less damage, but it feels better. So I have found my way into the game to show you this. But basically, Stormkeeper before the pull can be up to like 10 seconds before the pull without actually really losing anything. So I would recommend doing that pretty early because you can get a lot out of it. Stormkeeper being a pretty good single target cooldown now. Let's say you're pulling 15 pulls at 15-second pull timer at 10 seconds-ish. You'd want to Stormkeeper. Sitting here waiting a minute at like 3 or 4 seconds.
5,
you want to do
4,
totems.
3,
Here's your potion.
2,
start casting Lava Burst.
1.
Did a little early. Flame Shock while it's in the air. Storm Melee, pop all your cooldowns. Use the Lightning Bolt, and then just go ham with Lightning Bolts the entire time. Unfortunately, I have my PvP action bars right now, so I couldn't actually potion. But you want to precast Lightning Bolt or Lava Burst depending on your cast time. Mine being 1.7 seconds, you want to cast it like 2. Does have a bit of a travel time. But be careful because you do need to apply the Flame Shock before it actually hits the target, or it will not crit. You don't want to Flame Shock early and pull the boss before everyone's ready, so careful with the precast. Precasting is always kind of dangerous. If you're not comfortable doing that, then don't worry about it. It's really not the biggest thing. You can just Flame Shock on pull, Lava Burst, and then pop Storm Melee. Not really a big deal. So there's a little section on the website on the rotation page for like common mistakes, common misconceptions, things people generally ask about. So feel free to check that out, but I'm not going to go over all of them in this video since they are all pretty minor stuff that not everyone's going to be wondering about. So if anything strikes your interest here, make sure to go check it out on the website. So now that we've gone over everything I can really show on the website and everything, I wanted to go into the gameplay side of things. I'm going to be showing 2 separate VODs. I'm not going to go over the whole kill, but this one where I'm using Storm Elemental Primal Elementalist build, and then another one where I was using Ice Fury and Master of the Elements. Though I only have one of those, so I'm not sure quite how high quality it is, but if nothing else, I can critique my own play and tell you what not to do. But on this one, kind of gives you an idea of like the decision making that kind of goes into Storm Melee and stuff like that. So go ahead and play this. That is with sound on. Did not mean to do that. Go ahead and play this. In the opener, I got stunned, but also I wanted to say that I did my opener a little late. I was distracted or something, but you can see I did the opener I showed in the video. I'm holding Eye of the Storm for the ad to come because I don't want to waste it on one target. Then I end up getting stunned. I use Thunderstorm because I'm stunned and want to do more damage. I use Eye of the Storm anyway. I continue using Lightning Bolt on 2 targets. That is a new rotation. Here I'm kind of pooling a bit. There's no real technical reason to pool there. Doesn't really matter. You just Earth Shock and Lightning Bolt anyway. At this point, I was pooling a little more because I wanted to drop an Earthquake at the very last second because an ad was about to spawn. And also, as you get towards the end of your Storm Melee, if you can get away with pooling up to 100, that is actually better. And I guess not up to 100, but up to too close to 100. You get more Lightning Bolts in without really losing anything. But just a reminder on 2 target Earthquake now with Lightning Bolt instead of Chain Lightning. Well, that's like a little peek at what goes into decision making in high-paced environment. I guess it's only Heroic Vectis, but same as Mythic Vectis pretty much. Okay, so here is a Mythrax Heroic kill that I'm not going to show the whole kill of, in a pug that I did where I used Ice Fury, Master of the Elements, and Stormkeeper. And I definitely didn't play it perfectly, but there's a lot of things to take note of here. So first off, I should have used Stormkeeper up here before jumping down. I just didn't think about it. Could have gotten potentially another use in. But first thing I do, apply Flame Shock, summon the Elemental, use cooldown, Stormkeeper, Lava Burst to buff the first Lightning Bolt. Then I use Ice Fury, I get a Lava Burst proc during the Ice Fury. Going too fast for me to talk. I used Ice Fury there because I didn't have a Lava Burst yet and I wanted to buff the other charge of Stormkeeper, so I used Ice Fury first. Lava Surge proc happened during the Ice Fury cast, so straight out of the Ice Fury cast, I used the Lava Surge, used my other Stormkeeper Lightning Bolt. And then I just Earth Shocked on my Maelstrom, buff some Ice Fury charges instead of Earth Shocking there. I decided to Frost Shock instead, hoping I would get another Lava Surge proc so I could buff my Earth Shock, but it did not happen. But either way, I'm not really losing anything by doing that, so it was worth doing overall. Use my last one, Lightning Bolt. Got Lava Burst back. Hard to talk this fast. Got my Lava Burst back. Buffed the Earth Shock with it. Didn't have quite enough to buff Earth Shock, so I'm going to hold my Earth Shock a little bit here, see if I can get something out of it. I decided it's not worth overcapping it all for, so dump the Maelstrom. Hope I get something out of this too. Didn't get an overload, so I didn't get anything out of that. But dump my Maelstrom. I actually should have done my Maelstrom there because I overcapped by 5, but either way. Frost Shock, Frost Shock. I had to dump there, didn't get a Lava Surge proc. All comes down to like trying to buff things, but not overcommitting to it. That's kind of the name of the game here. Somehow out of my Totem Mastery range there. So Stormkeeper's coming back up, and I don't have Ice Fury this time, which is a little bit awkward. Got to buff a nice Earth Shock there. It's kind of hard to figure out how much to benefit from it. I got a Lava Surge proc, which is kind of convenient. Into an Earth Shock, and then Ice Fury's coming back up, and here's where I kind of choke. I freeze. I just stop for like 3 seconds. And I probably should have just used the charge. I just stopped, got the Ice Fury up, started dumping with that, and got the Lava Surge proc and buffed the Stormkeeper. I actually don't know if that's worth or not. I feel like downtime like that probably isn't really worth it. Even if instead of just freezing like that, I just use like Frost Shock or something, anything to fill that gap would have been good. Here I get to buff another Earth Shock. I end up holding a little bit, and then I ended up using it. I think I was, like in my head, as I had spawning, I was going to buff with Earthquake, but of course there was only one ad, so it didn't work out that way. But here we got potential ads coming, so I'm hoping to pool some Maelstrom here. End up getting close to cap, got to dump a little bit. But I'm hoping to get enough Maelstrom to start dropping some Earthquakes that are buffed. This got Essence Sheared almost. So buff that, but I don't have any Maelstrom to actually do it, so gotta build here real quick. Stormkeeper coming up again, so I probably want to buff the Earthquakes over the Stormkeeper. Had to run away from the beam. I have a buff. I ended up using an Earthquake. Or actually, no, I used an Earth Shock. Then I have Stormkeeper up. There I made a mistake, a pretty big one. Immediately when I pop Stormkeeper... Where'd it go? I pop Stormkeeper here. I got a Lava Surge proc. But I didn't notice it in time, so I ended up spending the Stormkeeper before the Lava Surge proc, and I had Ice Fury come up. I could have definitely buffed both those Stormkeeper charges if I had waited and used that Lava Surge proc first. I just didn't notice it quite in time before queuing up the spell. Unfortunate there. Your Fire Release come back up. I got multi-dotting out, so that's kind of a nice situation for Fire Release. And I finally use it here. Now I have a buff. I probably could have used an Earthquake and had the boss get run on top of it, so I definitely should have done that. But little things like that, little decisions you make in the fight do add up pretty quick. Put an Earthquake down, I could have gotten a couple ticks on those 2 mobs and on the boss from there. But that is just a little example of the very quick, fast-paced decision-making that goes into the Ice Fury Master of the Elements build. You have so many things to buff and only so many buffs to go around. Certain priorities happen. You have to think pretty quick on what you're going to do and have to plan a bit ahead on pooling Maelstrom and stuff. But I find it really enjoyable. It's definitely one of the harder talent setups in the game right now. But that's kind of the reason I like it. Like there, actually, another mistake I just caught. I pop Stormkeeper here. I use the first charge, which is fine. Then I Earth Shock, and Lava Burst is almost off cooldown. And Totem Mastery has 11 seconds. I should have refreshed Totem Mastery, used the Lava Burst, and then buffed the Stormkeeper charge. It's amazing how if you go back and watch your own videos, you notice just how much you're doing wrong. And a lot of people may not think I was doing much wrong because of my damage being so much higher than the rest of the group, but even if you're doing really well, you can still be making a lot of mistakes. So that is a nice little taste of what this build could look like in action. It's pretty intense, but it's a lot of fun. Alright guys, I think that's about all I can really say about the priority list. So the next section of this guide is going to be all about gearing, that being stats, Azurite traits, and trinkets, so stay tuned for that. So first thing first, let's take a look at the stat ratios. So to those of you who have been around a while, you probably know what stat ratios are, but to the rest of you, stat ratios are a way of measuring what your best stat distribution should be, and these numbers here are not stat weights. Stat weights would have intellect involved, and then the rest would just be showing the power in comparison to intellect, but a stat ratio is only looking at secondary stats. There is no intellect involved in this at all. So for example, with these current secondary stat distributions, we have 0.5 crit, 0.3 haste, 0.1 mastery, and 0.1 verse. Translating this to real numbers, if you had 1,000 total secondary stats, you would want 500 of it to be crit, 300 of it to be haste, 100 mastery, 100 verse, making 1,000 total. It's basically just showing the ratio of what your stats should be. So hopefully you can understand that. If you don't, you can go to the website and it goes a little more in depth about what it actually means and how it's made. But basic stat ratio here is single target, 0.5 crit, 0.3 haste, 0.1 mastery, and 0.1 verse. Dungeons, Mythic Plus or AoE, 0.6 crit, 0.2 haste, and 0.1 of the rest. It's really nice that our crit and haste, or specifically crit, is pretty much the same for single target and AoE. But this is really similar to our previous stat ratio in 8.1, or in 8.0 rather. You just switch the crit and haste, so you should have enough gear to be able to easily switch over to this, which is really convenient. And it's also the same for single target and AoE, which is also really convenient. But on the topic of stat ratios, let's take a look at consumables. For the flask, you want the intellect one, of course. For food, you can go with the feast, which is almost certainly going to be the best one in total, overall. But if you do not have access to a feast, you can also go with crit or the haste one. Potion of intellect, not using the bursting potion. Rune is pretty obvious, it's only level 121. Enchant. To ring enchant, you can either go with crit or haste or whatever try to match your stat ratio the best you can. Same with the weapon enchant, whichever one you have that is out of proportion. Or if you want a particular stat to be part of your reorigination array, you can go with that as well. This is the best way to do this, of course, is going to be simming, but if you don't want to sim, you can just go with the ratios. And then one thing to note about gems is there is an intellect gem, but it gives the same amount of intellect as it would if it was a crit gem. Or rather, it gives the same number of intellect as a crit gem gives of crit. So in some people, the higher eye level you are, the more this seems to be a thing. But for me, keep in mind, the sim does not have reorigination array enabled because it was a dungeon sim, or Patrick sim with dungeon talents on, dungeon traits on. Okay, I got the right word now. And as you can see here, intellect is a decent bit below crit and haste. So for me, I wouldn't want an intellect gem. I'd want a haste or crit gem depending on which stat I wanted the most. Probably crit gem for me. But yeah, this keep in mind, most people will probably want an intellect gem, so it is still suggested on the website that you get an intellect gem, but make sure to sim yourself and double check whether you actually want that or not, because for some people, the higher level you are, the more likely. For some people, you do not actually want the intellect gem, you want another secondary stat gem. So while we are on the topic of gearing and stats and all that, let's take a look at consumables. So obviously your main flask will be the intellect flask, there's no other real options there. If you're in a dungeon and going to die, I guess stamina flask maybe, I don't know. Food, you can go with the feast, you can go with crit food, you can go with haste food, depending on what you want. The best way to know what food or like main ring enchant or whatever you want is by simming stat weights and then going with the highest one there. This is the one situation where stat weights are probably better than ratios. But if you do not wish to sim, you can look at your ratios and kind of judge from that which one you want more. Best potion is going to be intellect potion. The on-use damage one does not really compete with intellect as much. And then rune is going to be just Battle Scarred Augment rune. Now I think note with gems, of course the weapon enchant, I guess that depends on what reorigination array you have and all that, but gems, as of 8.1, for me, the higher eye level I get, the less I want intellect, and that's kind of expected. Most expansions are like that. This one's happening pretty early though. These are my current stat weights. I don't think I had a reorigination array in this sim, but it's just kind of an example. Currently my stat weights have my haste and crit above intellect. So you may not even want an intellect gem. So if you want to know if you want an intellect gem or not, you do have to sim yourself for that. But just keep in mind, the higher eye level you are, generally the higher chance you will need to use no intellect gem. Not need to, but higher chance you won't need to use an intellect gem. I don't know if array counts if you don't have archive on. I feel like it probably doesn't, but either way, without archive it'd probably just be, or with archive it would probably be similar anyway, if not more disproportioned. But yeah, this little thing to know about gems. You don't always need the main stat one. Sometimes a secondary stat's actually superior. Now let's take a look at the Azurite traits. So all of this information is going to be coming from bloodmallet.com, so keep that in mind. If you want to check some of it on your own, you can go to any class or spec you want. Azurite gear here. Now, Plus 10 array means reorigination array, so that'd be your first archive if you had 10 stacks, and this is 5 stacks. So this is not just archive being number 1, it's only being number 1 if you're getting the array from it. And the next best trait is Echo of the Elementals. Very, very big outlier right now. It's quite significantly ahead of the competition. So if you can get access to Echo of the Elementals, ideally you'd want 2 of these. They do stack. They don't increase the duration, you're only going to see 1 elemental still, but it does twice as much damage. So ideally you have 1 archive to get yourself the array, and then you have 2 Echo of the Elementals as well for raiding. For dungeons, that can change a bit, but first we're going to look at some other options. You can go Blightborn Infusion, which is a pretty good one as well. Very versatile for single target and AoE. Dagger in the Back is one of the ones I don't really like personally, because you have to be behind the target in order to maximize its effect, and it also doesn't really benefit AoE at all. At least not any more than it would benefit one target. Swirling Sand, another crit proc. Pretty good for AoE as well, so another nice thing to have here. Champions of Azeroth, just a basic stat increase. I don't really think there's much places to get this, though. Archive is actually pretty good, even if it's a second archive. Go all the way down here, you got Synapse Shocks, Natural Harmony. Natural Harmony is pretty much middle of the pack now. Natural Harmony is pretty good for AoE, though, so we're going to look at that in a minute. Ancestral Resonance has been changed, as you may know, but it is still not very good, so I would not recommend going with this trait unless there's like a 1-minute burst window or something you want lust during. Because Mastery is just not very good, so the proc isn't really doing all that much. And some of these new traits are kind of weird. Most of this is just sim error, but... Moving on to Hectic Ad Cleave, as you can see, Natural Harmony very good up here. Glacier Matrix, even 5 RA is not very good on AoE apparently. Natural Harmony is a really nice trait for doing AoE because it is also decent on single target, and then it's really good on AoE, so it benefits you all around. It's a nice overall beneficial trait you got. And of course, like we mentioned before, Blightborn Infusion, also a very good overall trait. Does really good for single target, really good for AoE. Swirling Sands as well. I think Echo of the Elementals is still pretty high on AoE, even though it's strictly a single target trait. It's just that powerful, so if you have Echo of the Elementals, it's still pretty good even in dungeons and stuff. As long as you're using your elemental as much as you can. And as long as you don't have fights that are not going to get the Spark Elemental duration, because it lasts 30 seconds after your elemental expires. Now, Tectonic Thunder is the new trait a lot of people have been asking about. This one is a bit interesting because it really isn't that great, and it doesn't benefit the single target at all. So overall, it is not a very good trait. But it is really... It's pretty good for pure AoE, and the more targets the better. So if you had like 10 target pulls or something, this could do a lot of damage during those pulls. And is also worth noting, if you do have 3 of these for some reason, for like Mythic Plus or something, it is actually worth dropping Earthquake on 1 target, so keep that in mind. And also be careful doing that, because if the boss moves out of the Earthquake, of course you're going to lose a lot of your damage, and it will no longer be worth it. But if you do have 3 of these, Earthquake single target makes a comeback. So there are some little disclaimers, one of those being the one I just said on the site that we can talk about. So Natural Harmony, this is actually inaccurate right now. This is why I wanted to delay the video, because you never know what's going to be updated for like that first week, as we're still kind of learning and figuring out different things and trying things based on what we think might be wrong. So this ended up being something that changed in 8.1. This is how it was, but in 8.0 this is how it was. But in 8.1, it's no longer worth using Frost Shock to maintain the buff with Natural Harmony, even if you have 3. Lightning Bolt is just too powerful now to be worth losing 1 for the Frost Shock. If you do have Elemental Blast, it definitely improved, or if you do have Natural Harmonies, it's definitely improved with it. Definitely improves Elemental Blast, because you do proc all 3 of the buffs every time you use it. But this improvement is not enough to really be worth using, so I would still avoid Elemental Blast as much as you can. I'm having trouble pronouncing things today. But just worth noting that Natural Harmony is also decent for movement, because you do get to Frost Shock on the move, and you get that sweet buff. But it is not worth Frost Shocking otherwise. Lava Shock is a bit underrated on Sims, because you generally don't get to benefit from it fully. If you have 2 to 3 targets, specifically if they're spread out, so you Flame Shock them, you don't get to Earthquake though, you get pretty good stuff from Lava Shock. So if you like a council fight, Lava Shock could be solid, especially if you're trying to funnel that damage into 1 target. Igneous Potential, unfortunately, if you take a look back over here, Igneous Potential, AoE one? Yeah. Even on Patrick, Igni's potential is not so hot anymore because Lightning Bolt is doing a lot more damage than Lava Burst in proportion to how it was in 8.0. So we no longer really want Igni's potential that much. And if you did want to have, if you happen to have one, keep in mind the second one is a decent bit weaker than the first one. It's not huge, but the first one gives you the buff to the Lava Surge proc, and the second one does not increase that anymore. So just keep in mind, Igni's potential used to be really good, but it's no longer very good, so you may want to avoid it now. Just to quickly mention some things you should probably know about some of the traits. One, if you didn't know about the Ancestral Resonance change, it no longer has any effect on if you need to cast Bloodlust on your own or not. It is only when someone else casts it. Or sorry, it's only when you get the buff Bloodlust. It doesn't matter who casts it at all. That's the benefit, and then the duration is increased by whatever number. That's the new one. Igni's potential, as I said, kind of bad now. And if you were to stack it though, it only increases the damage component, so the first one is definitely a little better than the rest. Lava Shock sims pretty low, but on fights with 2 or 3 targets. Well, not 3 targets, but I guess if 3 targets are spread out, it could be really good there too. But 2 targets in particular, it's pretty good on because it does make your Earth Shock do pretty good damage. Natural Harmony, you do not want to use, this actually I believe is a little bit outdated, because we retested this and you do not want to use Frost Shock, so ignore this for now. This will probably be changed very soon. But Frost Shock, to keep the buff up, is not worth it. It does make Elemental Blast a bit better than it would be, but it's still not better than Earth and Raid, so don't bother trying to do that. I've tried it, didn't really work. Then Tectonic Thunder, the new one, be aware that if you for some reason, actually this actually changed, this used to be a thing, but I believe they changed that as well, so I'll have this updated too. But you can now benefit from Stormkeeper and this at the same time, because it will not eat the other proc. But the one thing you should be aware of is if you do have 3 of these for some reason, it is technically around a DPS neutral, maybe a minor increase, to use Earthquake instead of Earth Shock on one target. Although, if you were going to be doing something for single target, you wouldn't want to have 3 of these. But if for some reason you do have 3 in a dungeon or something, on the bosses, you can use Earthquake on single target and not lose any damage. In fact, you may even gain damage. By the way, I know I just said like 3 different things that contradict what's on the site. That is because they are things we learned very recently, so this is why I wanted to delay this video a bit, because we were still kind of figuring some things out with the traits and the simming and all that. This will be updated very soon. I just wanted to let you guys know that is why I delayed this, because I would have had some misinformation in the video. But it's a little later than I expected it to be, but either way, moving on. So as you may have guessed, the trinkets are also from Blood Mallet's website. But I wanted to take a quick look at the trinkets. Of course, with all of the things in this video, simming is the best way to figure out what's better for your personalized character. This is kind of more of a guideline. If you don't feel like simming and you just want to know if you should roll on an item or something, you can go check this website, or you can remember from the video or whatever. But trinkets to be on the lookout for. Ignition Mage's Fuse is really good for pretty much everything. It's really good for AoE, it's really good for single target. I highly enjoy having good on-use trinkets because you can customize when they happen. You don't get procs at bad times. So on-use trinket, very high simming, definitely something you want to go try to achieve, try to acquire if you are able to. But unfortunately, with the way Mythic Plus works right now, the best way to get it would be from the Mythic Plus cache or just spamming Toldagors. But the only way to really get a high one is from a cache, unless you get really lucky. So good luck to you on this one. I got it on one of my healers. Very unlucky there. This one's a World Quest trinket, so you probably won't be able to get that. Some of this stuff can be a little misleading because, not really misleading, but deceiving, because you see it at the top, but it's only competing with the other trinkets because, or rather, if it had a high eye level, which you're very, very unlikely to get this at very high eye level, so keep that in mind when you're looking at some of this stuff. Like this World Boss trinket is normally 355. Very unlikely you're going to get it at 385, which is when it would compete with the other stuff. Blaze Shocks, you can try to buy one at 385 or something, but that'd be very hard to do. Blaze Shocks is actually simming pretty high now, so that's cool. And then we got things like Conch that were not that great before, that are actually really good now because of how much we like crit. Our desire to have crit has gone up significantly, so trinkets with crit procs and things like that, like all these crit procs down here, crit and main stat proc, they've all risen up quite a bit. Voodoo Doll, things like the Voodoo Doll is something that you have to keep in mind is only for single target. Just as a general guideline, you gotta analyze your trinkets, and if it's single target damage, on things like AoE, if you had a medallion, this is my comparison because this is exactly what I have. Rot crusted voodoo doll. That was way too hard for me. Would be like technically the better option on a pure single target boss. But if you're doing something like Zekvaz, you're going to get more damage from the versatility because you can also use that when you're AoEing or cleaving, and it would benefit you in both. So that's another thing with on-use trinkets is, I guess, yeah, also proc trinkets. The ones that deal just single target damage are almost always going to be worse than ones that give you stats. Stats are just overall. There's never a situation where a stat isn't good. So things like that are also good to keep in mind. But generally, you can kind of just sim and find out what's better from that. For Mythic Plus in particular, you tend to favor having at least one on-use trinket, so you can use it with burst, and favor trinkets that also benefit AoE. But if you want to see this list, make sure to check out bloodmallet.com. I'll have that in the description, and you can check every class and spec that you want. Anyone who's made it this far, thank you so much for watching this massive guide. It is now being taken directly to court for attempted murder on my editing software, as you can see here. But regardless of that, appreciate you guys watching the whole thing. Make sure to leave a like if you liked the video, subscribe if you want to see more, and I hope you enjoyed at least some of this video that you have supposedly watched the entirety of. But anyways, guys, hopefully I'll see you guys in the future, and have a nice evening or day or wherever you are.